to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 reasons to choose the Deathgorge as your deck-building getaway, complete with skating rinks, demonic masquerades, frozen magics, and fine-thawed treasures. I'm your host, Skyler, and today with me is my mask-born co-host, Davey. Davey, how are you doing?
Good. I knew that had to be me. But now you won't know if it's me or the mask talking.
The whole time. And additionally, with us today is my other co-host who may never thaw out on Rhymelock Relics, Phil.
Oh, man. I'm getting called out right away. Here we go.
I'm excited to jump into this one with you guys, and thanks for letting me grab the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today is going to be a sequel episode. It's going to be the kind of kickoff of formalizing this particular topic as an ongoing format. So today we're going to be diving into the Universal Rivals decks from the Deathgorge window. So the 4 decks there, and additionally, Paths of Prophecy.
But why Paths of Prophecy?
So, as a sequel episode, the last time we did this, we did all of the decks that had released through Weird Hollow. And at the time, we believed that to be a true statement, that the end of Weird Hollow releases had arrived. But they snuck in as we were editing that episode, Path of Prophecy announcement. And so that was left out. But this is a series that we want to do going forward, where when a season fills out, we'll explore the 4 decks and what they offer you in deck building, why you might reach for them, both in Nemesis and Championship. So that was episode 110, and this is 142. So 32 episodes later, we get to tackle this, and we want to have this ongoing. So share it around if anybody is interested in building in the Deathgorge. But before we get to our main topic, we have some community shoutouts. I'm going to kick off the community shoutouts here. So there's one Vassal user or Discord user named Spinnerite that I had the privilege of sharing a Beardgrave game with, which could be its own community shout out.
I'll handle that. Yeah.
Courtesy of Wathlap there. But so Spinnerite and we grabbed a game together and got to chatting, and he let me know that he co-runs a game like outlet, we'll call it, called Goldberry Games, and that's located inside Bræt, which is a board game cafe in southern Denmark. So I visited their website. We're going to have links to both the Bræt board game cafe as well as Goldberry Games here. But I visited the website and I grabbed this line from it that I just wanted to read. So Goldberry Games, started by David and Ida in 2019, bringing together their shared love for tabletop games and specialist comics inside the fantasy and sci-fi universe. Goldberry was born with a goal of creating a local community of like-minded gaming enthusiasts and developing a cozy environment for enjoying the hobby together and meeting new people. So, in conversations with Spinnerite, he was telling me that he's working towards getting an Underworlds like community that meets regularly at this board game cafe and building that up. And I love that immensely. My wife and I are huge board gamers, and we've talked it almost as if it was like a dream that we wanted to pursue. Like, wouldn't it be cool to be a part of a board game cafe? Like, it's not something that I think the two of us are prepared to pursue on our own, but it's a space that we love. And I'm really excited that Spinnerite reached out to me, and this is a space that he gets to be a part of, and welcoming people into all sorts of aspects of board gaming, but specifically here, Underworlds.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. Do either of you have any community shout outs today?
Well, I think I'm going to just spin off of that because you mentioned Beardgrave, which I don't think we've talked about enough or really at all. we everybody knows that we think highly of Wathlab and all his efforts. He is a huge pillar of the community, with getting the Vassal mods together and his spectacular dedication to the Chosen Axes. But besides like coming up with sort of revamped early war bands in the style of what we saw with Rivals of the Mirrored City, that was something he was doing before that even came out. He has done an entire season, Beardgrave, and then even ran a Beardgrave League. I did not have the bandwidth to participate, but it sounds like you are, Skyler. And so it's all revamped war bands, correct?
Yes, correct. Well, not just revamped, but also home
totally
brewed.
new, right? Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I don't know if the ratio is about 50-50, but I will say at least half of the ratio is dwarves.
Yeah,
as it would be with that name. But I think I've used the phrase "labor of love" with Wathlab a number of times, and I think this fits that descriptor once again. It's just kind of spectacular, the amount of effort and care and attention to detail that he puts into these projects, and really, doing homebrew and doing stuff that is not going to have an official stamp. You have to be like really committed to loving it just on your own, because there's no reason, there's no there's nothing compelling people to use it. And so the fact that like there were enough people to even do a league speaks volumes to the respect that he has in our community. People trust him enough to like have come up with really interesting and fun rules. And I'm just really glad, even if I couldn't be a part of it, I'm really glad that it was able to happen. Like it's a cool story for the community. And I'm proud to be in a community that has a Wathlab in it.
Absolutely.
Agreed. And his designs are fantastic. I want to add that in there. I got to play as the revamp of Skae's Wild Hunt, and I got to play against, Morgoth's Blade Coven, a different take on Sepulchral Guard, like being revamped, as well as a revamp of the Chosen Axes. And I was just stunned. Like all four sang and were compelling and interesting. He's an incredible designer.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well, I guess that just leaves me, and I have just one small shout out, but something that I have been on the lookout for is more YouTube content, just to see what's out there, because I think sometimes I overlook stuff that hangs out on YouTube. And not a new one, but a channel that's been putting out more content lately is a critical focus channel. Discord handle is GummyToot. And he's got an interesting video that was just a nice piece to have, because I think it fills an interesting niche, and it was just 11 rules that are easy to miss in Underworlds. And it literally just went through and like had screenshots of the parts of the rule book and talked about like, these are rules that people often miss, and it like points them out and explains them. And I think as a new player, I would really probably love something like that. And I thought it was a really nice quick hitter that it's just like you can up your game quite a bit just by knowing that these things exist.
Love that. I imagine one of those rules had to have been plunder.
I don't think it was, which I think is funny, because we are like so self-deprecating about how often we forget about it.
Allow me to add a little bit more self-deprecation here, because I was called out by our good friends on Underworld's Underground for having not only like forgetting plunder all the time,
oh, no.
but I think I even called it pillage in the last. Whoops-a-daisy.
Forgetting to use it, forgetting what it's even called.
Yeah.
Oh
plunder.
boy,
What is it? Does
Love
it
it.
really exist?
You got to get yourselves a warband that cares about reactions as like a search count, because that's what cemented into mind for me.
Sure.
for sure.
I mean, I have had plenty of war bands that should really care about getting that extra one down. Like I played a ton of Fearsome Fortress with Zundara lately, and like there were opportunities to like kill another feature token into the fortress zone, but not for me. Such shortcuts to victory.
Womp.
no,
Yeah.
nay, I say.
Yeah. I'm a feature token hipster. I was No, that's not true. I don't know. Whatever. Something like that. I'm just old and forget a lot.
All right. Moving on from community shoutouts here, we have some exciting self-promotion to dive into. And I'll have one of you two kick off. Phil, why don't you kick off here?
Yeah, well, we have, it'll actually be happening this episode releases. So if you're listening to this and you didn't know about it, it's probably too late now. But we're going to be having a tournament June 8th, Madtown Throwdown Quarter 2 at Noble Knight Games in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, as is our usual haunt. But more importantly, and more relevant if you're listening to this now, we're going to be having another one in Quarter 3, and that's going to be on August 17th. And this one is going to have a ticket to Worlds. So if you still would like to punch your ticket to Worlds and you would like to come and experience Southern Wisconsin and hang out with us and all of our fine friends at Noble Knight Games, join us on August 17th. We'd love to see you there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, get to kind of be a part of this community that we really, it sounds like we're patting ourselves on the back, and I suppose we are, but really have managed to build up kind of painstakingly into a pretty great scene, honestly. There's so many players in it right now that this last league, which we just wrapped up, which, am I right, Skyler, there were 25 people came out for the final week?
Yeah.
Maybe more on that later, because I think you made some great innovations in the league format, and especially the finals week, that made it engaging all the way to the bitter end. But I couldn't play everybody. Like I got to the end, and I'm like, usually I've managed to play every single person, but we've gotten so big that it's just not possible anymore. I mean, it is possible if you play extra games, but just really great. And we'd love to share that with folks. I'm going to especially call out Tyrell, who said it's the only event that might work out for their calendar. And so maybe looking at coming in, which would be awesome.
It'd be pretty great.
Yeah, we're not going to hold anybody to anything, but we would absolutely love if you want to make the trip. Let us know if there's something we can do to make that easier for you. I think specifically there, I was offering to help shuttle to and from airport and all that sort of thing. Like we've got the people, and we'd love to get you here and make you part of that experience, because I think we're going to have a good one.
Agree. And if you'd like to check out what the schedule is going to look like, we have an event page live just ahead of this episode. It's something that I'm working behind the scenes to get posted up. So if you're listening to this now, it should indeed be posted up and linked on the episode.
Scott, you've been working on anything that you need to plug? Look at that smooth transition, segue master.
How can we do a deck building episode without talking about my latest project? What the Decks is 13 episodes in and streams live every Tuesday at noon Central Standard Time, which is UTC -5 right now. It depending on where we're at in daylight savings time, it could be -5, -6, but right now we're at that -5 point. And if you want to come join me, I would love to have you there. Anytime there's people in the chat, it really livens up the episode for me, helps increase that enthusiasm. And every week we explore a deck together, whether that's a deck that's been submitted, and I'm always taking submissions if you'd like to see a deck built from the ground up. That's one of the things I do. Another is reviewing them, kind of working backwards. And so if there's a deck that you'd like reviewed on the show, please let me know.
So
go ahead.
I mean, I know you did a review of your beloved Head Crackers, Fort Crackers. We kind of talked that up previously. Have you ever done like a review of a deck that somebody else has built?
Yes, I've got to do that a few times now. Specifically, Rothgorn's Man Trappers with the Malevolent Masks, submitted by one of our locals.
Okay.
And that was a really fun one to dive into. When somebody submits a deck to me, I get to the way I work through it is I try to identify what its game plan is, see if I can't parse that out myself. And so it's actually a blind look. I don't look at it in advance. And so I'm working through what I think the game plan is, where I think its strengths are, where it might struggle, and if there's any recommendations I might make. And most recently, I had to do that with one submitted by Wellner, local of ours as well. And that was Grisel's Arenae with Void Curse Thralls, which is wild. He took it out this Thursday and actually scored like 24 points with it.
Wellner, you crazy.
Yeah. There might be something there. And just to kind of round that out, recently did Crimson Court with Hungering Parasite as a build from the ground up. If you want to check that out. Reason I highlight that one specifically is I also start my fresh build episodes with a field report of how the previous deck we built went, because I think that's really important in the deck building process. It shouldn't just be, I think, the theory of this build is ironclad. No, like part of deck building is testing it, seeing out if it works as well as you think it did, and swapping the parts that aren't out in for things that might fit better there. So there will be, at the top of the next episode, a field report on how the Bloodthirsty hosts did. And that particular episode coming out here on, the Tuesday coming up here, the first Tuesday of June, will be Starblood Stalkers. And I get to pair. I've been asked to choose my own pairing for this, and I haven't chosen yet. But whatever I do, I hope to make Phil proud.
All right.
So, let's move on from there. It's been a while since we've actually hung on to the What the Hex is Going On With You part of the show, because we often have so much to talk about that we've been skipping it a bit here. So let's take a moment real quick to see what the hex has been going on with you, Phil.
Well, been playing a lot of Skinnerkin. I've been chopping haunches. But
the haunch must flow.
The haunch must flow. But along with that, I've also been working on painting them. I'm leaning towards taking them to Nova, but obviously that's still a long way off, so there's plenty of opportunity for that to change, but feeling pretty good about them. Played a lot of it this past league, maybe too much, just because of the makeup of our league. It's like, do I really need to be playing my tournament prep deck? But it worked out, and it was quite effective, and it was really fun, and I'm still riding that high with the Warband, so pretty excited to finish getting them painted. I've been doing like a very pale vampire skin on them, which usually they do the ghouls as like kind of green, but in the lore, Flesh Eater Courts are actually a cursed vampire, so they're not like zombies. So I was always a little curious why they were green, but it's been tough. I'm not good at painting skin at all, and then trying to paint gray skin has been a challenge, but learning a lot.
Love it. How about you, Davey? What the heck's been going on with you?
It's been kind of a painting desert for me. I just been having trouble getting motivated, but I have been trying some different things. I played a lot of Zendara. Most recently, I had a big flurry where I was like, let me just try this out. Like, I think I'd seen Dread Pageant. Somebody I think Brian actually mentioned that he thought the pairing with Rhymelock Relics was pretty good with them. And there were a couple key interactions. I was like, yeah, he might be right. And so I played a whole bunch, and a whole bunch for me, I should say. But really had fun. And it's a warband that I've always liked. But sometimes when one person in our meta is really maining a particular warband, then you're like, I'll back off. Like, I don't want to do a whole bunch of mirror matches. So I didn't get to play them quite as much as I might have otherwise. But it was a thing. It's been a pairing that even I think I lost to Val something atrocious, like 5-20. But even that, like, had a couple key turning points. I'm like, oh man, like if I land that particular attack, then I think like it stays close. And there were it's one of those decks that has enough tricks, and enough options in the early rounds that I really enjoy it. I think sometimes I'll try a warband out and it has such a dictated early first round, like, you know, it might be like, okay, I'm gonna have to declare 4 charges. That's what I'm gonna do, and that's not bad, but it's not always that interesting. This is like, that might be what I have to do, but it might be that I hang back. And I love warbands that present that kind of like, which is the right way forward? Like, can I score enough without putting myself at risk? Or I don't know, like it had enough decision points and enough cool interactions and tricks that I was like, I might try this out a little more. So
Nice.
that's been where I've been dipping my toes in, experimenting most recently.
Yes. Now, Brian's not here to speak for himself, but it was funny. I was like, did you see that Davey's been doing Dread Pageant with Rhymelach Relics? And he's like, yeah, what is that about?
I think someone needs to remind him that Davey is also a big Slaanesh fan and just like stays off of it all the time because Brian's the big Slaanesh guy. But like, props to you, Davey, for getting to use your Slaanesh warband again.
All right,
absolutely. Yeah. And gone is the age of like really having to worry too much about like one warband being brought twice being like a big portion of what you see on a Thursday night.
Right. Yeah. When we'd have like 8 people out, it's like, well, if 2 of us brought like Dread Pageant, then that's a quarter of the field. Now it's like, who cares? There's 26 of us there. Like,
yeah. I'll find some unique matchup.
Yeah. Oh, I say that, and then like I think one of the most recent ones I had, it wasn't a true mirror, but me and Chop both did a Zandara versus Zandara.
No boy,
which was entertaining. I think it was my Zandara Fearsome Fortress and his Zandara. I think he did your Beastbound Assault. He was trying that pairing out. So.
Absolutely, yeah. He's the one that gave me the idea. So I stole it from him.
Saved it.
And on the topic of Thursday nights, that'll be my what the heck is going on, because I'll just speak a little bit more to the end of this league that I got to host and hype up and be excited about here this last Thursday. So as you said, 25 people out, and that there were still individuals that couldn't make it out that wanted to be there, be part of the fun. Like you yourself, couldn't make it out, just the way it landed. And we had 34 people interact with this league, which is insane to me.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Breaking that 30. That's quite a feat.
And the thing I'll highlight here at the end that was really fun is an innovation to like work on facilitating the growth that we've seen is I wanted to make finals night something exciting for everybody. Now that we've grown to this point where a top 4 or even a top 8, is such a small portion of everybody that's interacting with it, that I wanted to make sure that there was still excitement, still a reason to come out. And so everybody was paired into pods of 4s that could make it out that night. And so then you were competing against people, and that was based on your standings that you accumulated over the league. So like 1 through 4 was paired against each other for the finals table. And then we had kind of like a silver finals table that was 5 through 8. And, if somebody couldn't make it, then I'd bump 9th, into that 5 through 9. Same would have been true if anybody from 1 through 4 couldn't make it. But because that's the one night where like I work off of attendance, because it's the one like night where we get to celebrate and like if make it a big deal. And so it's the one time we don't do makeup games, but you got to compete in these pods against the people that you kind of landed next to during the standings of the league. And each pod was competing for a Bane of Heroes token that my dad and I were able to make, which was really awesome. It was made out of black acrylic, and it had like a parasite silhouette cut out of it. And then in place of that silhouette was poured resin with like
this orange, cool like yellow, red, orange marbled effect.
Yeah,
they look great.
And I had a blast during the night. Anytime a pod would finish, because it was a best of 1 for the first game for time management purposes, and then it was a best of 3. The 2 winners would get faced off against each other, and they could choose a best of 1 or a best of 3, depending on what they preferred. If they didn't agree on a best of 3, it would default to a best of 1. But then when those pods would wrap up, I would go over to that individual, have them pick out, because of the way this is poured, they all end up being unique, like one of a kind pieces. Yeah. And so I'd lay them out and I'd be like, all right, take your pick of one of the parasites that are left. And then I would, after they take it, I would yell and announce to the room, a parasite has been released, to, the individual that won the pod, or a parasite's on the loose. And it was a blast trying to inject energy into the night. And when people dropped out of those pods, we had a surprise for them as well. So your first two people that didn't make it to the finals of the specific pod would then get paired against another two people for a 2v2 game. And we could spend a whole segment talking about 2v2, so I won't. But I will say that it is something that Brian and I got to experience in Alberta when we went, and it was something that we knew we wanted to bring back because it was an absolute blast. So,
yeah, I actually, one of my recent games, I got to play against somebody who had been part of that. I'm never sure who's good with like names publicly, but it was Impressly Snipes, who's been doing a lot, and he got to team up with Aaron as part of that, and that was kind of fun to, it was just like a random person that I started playing online. And he's like, have I met you? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And he's like, well, your voice sounds familiar. I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. And he's like, no, but I like, did you come up to Alberta? I was like, no, but some of my guys did. He's like, oh, and then, it was just like that, that the world is small sort of feeling. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
let's do it.
Let's jump into our main topic. So today we're going to be breaking down each of those 5 decks one by one. So that's the Deathgorge decks and Passive Prophecy. So it'll be Breakneck Slaughter, Force of Frost, Malevolent Masks, and Rime Locked Relics. And our goals are going to be, we're going to run them down as to why you would reach for them, essentially what the deck brings to the table in our minds and what game plans they can best fit into. We're going to provide you with warband pairings for each deck that we think are worth giving a try and pairing with that particular deck. So as we run through each one, just going to kind of give you, the listener, an outline here. We're going to give you a thematic and mechanical summary of what the deck is and is doing. And then we're going to dive deep into why each of us might reach for the deck in a Nemesis pairing. And then we're going to give just a quick piece on championship with that deck. If it's plot locked, we'll let you know why you would reach for this deck over another plot card. And if it's open, we're going to highlight a few cards that we think are real bangers in that open universal deck for you, as well as a few warbands to try. And before we dive into that, the one thing that I want to address that's changed in the 32 episodes since the last time we've done this is the Nemesis landscape. At the time, there were 9 universal decks, and 2 of them weren't purpose-built for the Nemesis landscape. They were adopted from a bygone era, whereas now, Nemesis is more filled out. We have 14 decks now. We don't have any that weren't purpose-built for Nemesis, and 7 of those 14 decks are plot-locked. So, which I think is really interesting, that half of them exactly at this time are plot-locked. We get 4, as you know, from each seasonal block. So right now that seasonal block is Gnarlwood plus Weird Hollow, Deathgorge, and Winter Maw, which is the block that we're currently filling out.
Yeah.
Nemesis is also the premier format these days. When at the time, it was still kind of carving out this landscape because, there were only these 7 decks. And 7 was really gaining steam behind Nemesis. I say 7 because I'm discounting the 2 from before. Right. But we're at 14 purpose-built decks these days. And Nemesis is definitely the premier format of the game. It's clearly what the balance focuses around. It's what's played for the World Championship. So that's where the bulk of our discussion is going to be. But we still have an appreciation for the championship format. We got to host a championship tournament at Adepticon this last year and plan to do so again here in 2025. Yeah, in Milwaukee. It's moved for those who didn't know.
And I just, when we talk about being the premier format, we're not trying to denigrate any particular, like if you're playing Rivals, that doesn't, us calling Nemesis the premier format doesn't mean that like Rivals or Championship are not valid ways to play. They're great. They're awesome. But we're just taking our cues from how GW is structuring its events and its World Championship thing. And so that's just a reality that we're working with. But the other play formats are rewarding and super fun, and we play them and enjoy them for sure.
All right. Well, I think what we'll do here is we will dive into the first deck. And we're going to do that a bit popcorn style. So instead of necessarily doing Passive Prophecy, which would be the first one in release order through Grimlock Relics, we're going to let each host kind of pick which one, as I pass the ball to them, that they want to kick off with a summary, and then we'll dive into it from there. So Phil, I'm going to toss the ball your way first.
Sure. Well, let's maybe start with the Boogeyman deck, which maybe isn't anymore, but we'll get there. So Force of Frost, I think, is a good place to start. This is a deck, if you don't know, is focused primarily on spellcasting. So it includes a 50-50 split of regular gambits and gambit spells in the deck. So it is a heavy leaning towards having spell support, which means you do need to have wizards to take full advantage of the deck. Conveniently, the deck does have some ways in its upgrades to actually make your fighter a wizard if you don't have one for some reason. So you're not like completely locked out of using spells if you don't have a wizard to start with, but I think you'd still want one. So the other, like, besides I'm going to cast a bunch of spells, the deck also has a small sub focus on, I guess, what I would consider kind of a passive mechanic of ice counters, where it's trying to put ice counters on fighters and then gain some benefit from doing so. And that fills out in a bunch of different ways, either through scoring or through benefits that you get off your upgrades, or things that you can end up doing with your power cards. But overall, it's not the main focus of the deck. You don't have to interact with that at all, really. But it's a fun little mini game, and I think it actually opens the deck up to more play styles than just the direct spellcasting, if you want to use it. Yeah. Anything I missed about Force of Frost, guys?
I mean, I think a good point to mention, because when you said, let's start with the Boogeyman, I was like, what deck is that? And it's because Force of Frost has been subjected to a number of rounds of erratas to tone down some of its excesses. I remember our first review were like, this deck is all over the place. It has casting. It has stuff that's clearly like offense. It has stuff that is control in nature. And it turned out that the casting and control components were so strong that even if you were leaving some of the aggro-y stuff like break the ice or whatever behind, the remaining components were so strong that they were great in the decks that could really, really take advantage of them. And I'm thinking like Ephelem and to some extent Domatan really just kind of ran away with it. Like, couple took their own extremely powerful in-faction stuff and could take it over the top. And so some of those things like the big offenders, some of the spells got toned down. It's been tough to say conclusively, but that seems to have brought it in check. It's always hard to say like, hey, this has been brought in check because, or like, I'm not seeing this anymore because it is been brought down to a reasonable level, or because people just got tired of playing it and they're trying some of this deluge of new stuff that we've seen since.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, I am thoroughly unsure. I don't think I saw it at all in our last league. So I don't know. I don't know if the changes made enough of a change or if it was too much. I just haven't played against it. But
yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen it since it received its latest batch of nerfs. And so I was curious. I just looked it up. There's 4 errata cards in this deck now, which 4 out of 32. That's a significant portion, and it's definitely like the standout. I don't think there's another deck that's received maybe even more than 2. Yeah. And Chill the Grave, I think, was something. So that's a card that was rewarding you for 2 or more enemy fighters out of action as an end phase. It was giving you 2 points. That's for 3 fighters now. And I think that was such a universal card here that I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that its presence is so limited now. Like I never saw a Force of Frost deck without it, and it was just kind of an inevitable score that would come up. Whereas now, I imagine a lot of people would leave it at home, especially if they fear an elite landscape.
Yeah, I think that was a huge change, and I think I don't want to say it was unfortunate, but I think the decks that could really, really leverage this, or the warbands that could really leverage this deck, were ones that had casting and control elements or whatever. The ones that didn't, if you were trying to dip into this deck and you don't have casters, like that has to be part of it, is Chill of the Grave. And now that it is 3 out of action, that's essentially saying like I need to wipe out every model on the other side if I'm facing Domitans or Thricefold or or whatever the case may be. That's a big ask. Like it's totally going to happen if you're playing Gits or Thorns or something like that. But against those other elite warbands, it's a big ask. And if that is taken off the table, then there's just so much less that you can reach for that it gets pretty hard to say like, yeah, this is worth me dipping here. The opportunity cost of taking this deck over something else is challenging.
Yeah, I feel the errata has pushed it much more towards a wizard requirement than previously, especially since like 5 of its 10 gambits are spells on its own.
Yeah.
So you're limited in the objectives that you can take if you don't have spell casting, the gambits, and the upgrades are still really powerful, I think, overall. And the fact that it can kind of unlock spell casting for you is cool too. But you can't lean into that as your game plan. It's got to be auxiliary to already having wizards, and kind of elevating that reliability there. Well, cool. So I think in Nemesis, we would agree that reaching for this deck is something that you're going to be doing primarily for casting purposes, and possibly if you're looking for that passive play. But even that's kind of hard to find enough pieces to like pull into, I think, a deck on its own.
Agreed. Yeah. I had built a few decks in the past, and to Davey's point, like Chill of the Grave was absolutely essential to have there. But it was really just leaning on like, I'm going to play this warband that I think has a lot of good in-faction cards and then just add the ice counter stuff. So getting able to get up to 3 on one fighter, there's a 2 glory score, have 1 on a fighter with this upgrade. Well, and there's another score at the end of the game. And it was just like, we're just sort of lightly salting in some passive scoring to add to what a warband's maybe already doing. I think you can still do that, but it's harder now. And I'm not sure that the reward makes a lot of sense.
I would agree. And then in Champs, this is one of our wide open decks. No plot lock here. And I wonder too, I don't think that Champs is first and foremost how things are balanced. However, there are interesting ripples in the sense that when a deck is open, what we'll see kind of hit the FAR, because the FAR still receives updates. Didn't this last particular patch, but I imagine I would be surprised to see it left out of the next one. I think that there are just so many strong cards in here that you could pull out. Part of me kind of wonders too if champs had any impact on the errata that we saw, and probably not. It probably just ends up addressing it in both places. But I remember when I would look at championship lists, I'd see Chill of the Grave in almost every one. So it was kind of a menace, maybe, as far as inclusion goes in both formats, along with Frostworm Cloak there.
I feel like not being plot locked, Frostworm Cloak was if I were to build a championship deck and Frostworm Cloak had never been changed, I don't know why I wouldn't put it in my deck. Just as close to I have a guaranteed -1 damage upgrade that I can put in any deck. Yeah, of course I'm going to take that.
Yeah, the only decks I can see it not going in are the big guy decks, where you can't go on a large fighter. But other than that, yeah, now what is it? You have to be. Oh, it's if the fighter is not adjacent. Is that what the
correct?
Yeah.
So if the fighter is adjacent, then the damage reduction doesn't apply, and you still have to get the ice counter on first. But that's still not hard.
Yeah. Well, so do you think it would be in the 3 cards that we would kind of cherry pick out of here and present to listeners as cards we'd take in a championship deck, or do you think it doesn't quite make the cut now?
I would still take Frostworm Cloak personally. If I wanted to be reaching for Force of Frost for other reasons as well, I might have to think about it. Looking at what am I expecting to see in the landscape? If everything is range 1 aggro, I'm probably not thinking that Frostworm Cloak makes sense, but there's a lot of ranged fighters these days. They seem to be much more common than they used to be, or maybe we just see them more than we used to.
Yeah, I think I've thought about this myself, and I think that people just will take a inherent advantaged look at a ranged warband, and so I think as we see new ones get released into the game, there's just more people that will gravitate towards that ranged advantage, and we'll see that picked over a warband that doesn't have that range option. I could be wrong, but I think that range will always be in the competitive picture.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's certainly true. I don't know why you wouldn't it makes your threat range bigger, and we know that action economy and threat range are 2 pretty important pieces of making everything work. So
word.
Yeah,
totally.
I'm going to take that statement and just that's going to lead right into my pick. And obviously I'm picking a Gambit spell here. So it's not, no matter what deck you have to have casters, you probably have to have, you can salvage this if your caster is dead, but Yara's Frozen Bonds, it's not a ping, but the control possibilities of this is if place an available feature token within 3. So you get to put a blocked out or a cover if that's what you need at the moment, and then give a move token out to somebody next to a block. And I think both sides of that, putting a block out on command and giving a move token in the right spot, can be a super game breaking moment if you play it at the right time, especially with how the charged out rule works. And so that would be, if I have casters, I'd be looking real hard at bringing that spell.
Agree. That's being able to put down move tokens is just so punishing. It's something I always side eye, and I'm like, can I fit that in?
Yeah.
And for my pick here, it's just going to be if you're reaching for this deck with Spellcaster Warband, why not go for a 2 Glory Surge to really elevate your game plan? It's going to be Bitter Storm. Score this immediately after your Warband casts its 4th or subsequent spell in the same phase. So in Championship especially, I feel if you lean hard into this, you can have all of the spell attack and spell gambit fuel you need to get 2 points out of a surge and really get the ball rolling.
Yeah. Obviously, if you have multiple casters, the card isn't trivial by any means, but it certainly becomes easier. You just can make spell attack charges with multiple fighters and then have them each casting gambit spells. And sometimes it'll just be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're done. And that's super easy, and it feels like cheating almost.
Indeed. All right. So for warbands here, I think it's pretty safe to say we'd recommend Domiton Storm Coven. And are there any other spellcasters you'd recommend take a look at this deck?
I think Ephelum has enough great in-faction spells that I think they might reach for Fearsome Fortress first now. But I think this is a reasonable expectation, and it has some survivability improving things. Somebody's trying to snipe Ephelum and you have the Frostworm Cloak. Like I think it was pre the most recent set of erratas, but I don't think they were so big that I would say our guy Captain Murder, who took down the LVO with that particular combination, I think that's still got plenty of legs. Not as dominant as it was at that time, since both sides of that pairing got hit, but I think that's a still totally reasonable pairing to snap up.
I think that pairing's gone sleeper mode since both parts got hit. Like it's just kind of like a knee jerk away from it, but I think the strength is still there.
Yeah, I mean, like it'd be hard for the changes to be so strong that suddenly they're like dropped out of relevance, right? So definitely Ephelum. Just as a quick note for using this with Domitan, the change to Domitan from multiple erratas ago does make this deck a little awkward because your reaction windows are eaten up. You don't have a choice about using the Inspire reaction, and since that is an after activation reaction, just something you're going to have to think about if you build this with Domitan. It's still a good pairing, but it makes it much harder. For instance, Frostworm Cloak. You can't use the Frostworm Cloak reaction if you need to inspire somebody. So I don't know of another warband that I'm like, oh, this is a really good matchup for them. But one that I thought was fun and interesting was Crimson Court that our local Jazz used. And it was pretty effective. They have multiple wizards, although you'd forget about it the way that they get played a lot. And they have some interesting stuff that they can do. And if you lean into their Magic game plan, they actually have some pretty cool tech. So I don't know if it's like your first choice with Crimson Court, but I think it's a fun one.
Well, it's the choice that breaks my dreams at LVO. Jazz.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to Jazz about this. So just to add a small bit of detail to it, they have two spells that one is on focus, one is on channel. The focus one is what can make a fighter bloodthirsty in round one, but you only have level 1 wizards. So she was like, yeah, being able to get my wizards up to level 2 with so many of the different upgrades in here that does so, as well as to provide me with a third additional level 2 wizard, is really like kind of the core behind that deck. And you can double down on essentially IR's Frozen Bonds, Davy's pick, because that channel spell that they have, it also awards a move token to a fighter. So you can really
wow. So
yeah,
lots of
control the
play
field
there.
Absolutely.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, give it a spin. Well, let's move on to our next pairing here then, or Universal Rivals deck. Sometimes I refer to them as pairings. I don't know if others fall into that. But Davey, which one do you fancy tackling?
I mean, I have to grab masks because that's where I've lived off and on for a while. If I was going to give you the overview on masks, it would. I don't know if there's a deck that is quite as wrapped up in its own mechanic as this. Like it is real hard to say like, well, I'm going to take Malevolent Masks, but I'm only going to take a little bit of it. Like this this more than many decks really needs you to like invest heavily in it. It has multiple objectives, gambits that trigger off of having particular upgrades interacting with the deck. It is great if you have the ability to get Seed Glory, because it does not have its own inherent ability to like get those masks out early. There's a couple surges that you can use, but they're not silky smooth on their own. But if you can bring those along and get the masks out early, you can burn through your objectives in a frighteningly fast manner. And sometimes you can pull some of the craziest plays I've seen in the game with some of the mechanics of these masks. I think that is what keeps me coming back, is for like those moments where I'm like, wow, I've never seen this pulled off in a game of Underworlds. And so that's my big pitch for it.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's a deck I love too. And I'll just say, thematically here, it's such a cool deck too, because we have these 6 demon possessed masks that are the star of the show. And they're realized in their own individual upgrades. But then they're also on all of the art, as well as commonly in the flavor text as well. You'll actually just see in the flavor text the masks doing the quotes, speaking. And it's, to your point, as far as like self-intricacies and reliance, it's such an interesting and rewarding puzzle box. The more pieces of the puzzle you get into play, the more the puzzle opens up to you. And so if that sounds attractive, that's a reason to reach for this deck.
Absolutely.
In Nemesis, is there anything that you feel you want to kind of like highlight when it comes to like deck building with masks, like things that people should be aware of if they choose this, maybe different parts of their deck that they're going to be foregoing or need reliance in with the deck?
Yeah, I can say, I mean, they've got Surge for a mask holder holding an even, Surge for a mask holder holding an odd, Surge if an inspired person has a mask. So if you, like, the ideal situation is someone who has Seed Glory, who has a controllable Inspire, and who cares about getting on feature tokens. And so that screams often Lady Harrows. I think that's maybe a great thing there. I mean, we'll talk about specific pairings there, but those especially are big time. And then they have a Surge in there that's Feast of Violence, I want to say, for a third range 1 or 2 attack action. So if you're going to, that's another way forward, is to if you can trigger a bunch of those. So I think if you have something that lines up with those, then you can be kind of operating towards your faction surges and objectives at the same time as you're operating towards the decks. And then you also have to have space. You have to have room for upgrades. If you're somebody who has just like hot fire upgrades. So for example, I think Hexbane, who has a way to cheat out upgrades really easily, except the problem is that their upgrades are so hot fire in their own deck that they are like, I don't really want to put these masks on because I would rather have my woodcutter strength or whatever.
Yeah.
That you also have to have room in your deck for including these masks to trigger the other things.
Yeah. It's kind of that weird, like, I want to do all the other things in the deck, but the masks themselves, because it takes an action to do most of the things on the masks, you don't get an immediate benefit for playing the masks unless you have their one power card taking over, which is an amazing card.
Yeah.
But it to your point, like it really does make you think, like, well, is this pairing actually good for this warband? Because, I could maybe be stronger if I don't have masks. And I think in that way, it almost makes me think like this is a good deck where the thing I really want are these really nice objectives, and the power deck I'm willing to like pay the tax to get access to those good objectives.
Yeah, I think the other thing I missed out is like a resurrect. In faction is can really unlock. They have a couple of big payoffs in this deck, which is having 3 masks out or having more masks out than the enemy has fighters. I think.
Yep.
And those can really like lean you towards some big scores towards the end. If and those are obviously particularly facilitated by the ability to bring back any mask wearers that have died.
Yeah. I guess there may be appropriate point to shout out our local Wellner, our zombie enthusiast playing the Exiled Dead. On paper, I never would have thought that it would make any sense to put this deck with Exiled Dead, but he's been doing work with it. And
Absolutely.
To your point, like
if you didn't shout him out, I was going to.
It's that situation where it's just really easy to get zombies back because basically every activation, unless you can find a way to deal with Dantalos, he's going to be able to bring a zombie back. So like you can't keep them dead. So it just becomes very simple for them to outnumber you and have a bunch of mask wearers.
He only runs 5 surges in that deck, by the way.
What?
Yeah. So that, I mean, not that we need to do a deep dive in that deck, but there's some problems with Exiled Dead's objective deck, so it makes it tough for him.
But it's worthwhile if you can pull this off.
Yeah. Well, and their end phase scoring is so high that like he's still able to score like nearly 20 glory with the deck without having the surges. So it's still good. But just a very strong example of like why Resurrection can make this deck very strong.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll add to deck building with Malevolent Masks is when you're looking at their Gambits category, there's a card in there called Scrabble in the Dirt that'll let you see one of their Gambits back. But it costs you a card. And just take a second look at this card because I love it. And I wanted to bring it up because the more of their ploys that you can fit into your deck, then the higher value I think Scrabble in the Dirt has, because you're often going to find that you either have a mask that you don't need in your hand, or because like you've already drawn well enough into the mask that you need, or you have a card that's just not specific enough for the exact scenario that you're finding yourself in right now, but that one that you used earlier that's in the discard pile is, you can go and get it back. And I just, anytime I find myself with 4, 5 or more of the Gambits from this deck, I think about Scrabble in the Dirt, and I recommend it.
Yeah, it's a great example of a card that enables some of those plays I was talking about earlier. They're just like crazy stuff that I've never seen pulled off.
Yeah, well, I think it would be amiss if we didn't talk about the cards that enable those crazy things. And I guess I mentioned it in passing, and I should have actually said what the card does because we've had people ask us to do that before. But Taking Over is the one that I had mentioned previously. This is one of the ones that sort of allows you to do some of this nutty stuff. And this is a gambit that you just choose a friendly fighter with a mask upgrade, and you can make the action from that mask upgrade. And the reason that's so good is because it lets you turn on the masks in the power step rather than as an activation, or it lets you take an extra attack or make, push adjacent fighters. These are all different things the masks can do. I think if you had a gambit that said any of the effects that the masks give, you'd be pretty happy to have it in your deck. And so in a way, that's really what Taking Over says.
Yeah, and so many of the gambits are bangers in this deck. If I recommend just giving it a look. If anything that we've been talking about sounds interesting, because there's ways to pull upgrades off of dead fighters. There's ways to bring a dead fighter back for one final action in the power phase,
or maybe more.
Yeah. Davey, would you hit us with that sick combo real quick?
So I'm not the person that came up with this, but there's been some pioneers that have figured out the Gore Chosen combo with masks. And here, this is a crazy thing where you bring back a mask wearer using Maskborn, and that fighter is supposed to die at the in the was it the surge step after that?
After the power steps concluded, for sure.
Yeah, but before you reach that, you slap down Final Frenzy, which says this fighter cannot die until they will die at the end of the round, but they otherwise will not die unless this upgrade is broken. And so you basically bring a 5 or 6 wound fighter back for free, and they're back at full health, swinging around. And hey, if you didn't want to have them die at the end of the round, then you also use the revealed aspect, I think it is.
Yes.
Which just swaps an upgrade out. So then you swap Frenzy out with something else. Frenzy doesn't break, and so now they're just really alive and not about to die.
At
so
full health all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So wild.
Yeah. So once you finally killed Gorehulk, to have all his 6 wounds come back on the table and have him start choking fools again, it's a crazy thing.
Love it. All right. Well, I know the 3 of us could sit here and talk about masks all day. So
Sure could.
I'm going to jump us into championship. Just let's grab a card each that we feel, since this is open, not plot locked, that we feel is worth a good look in championship, one you might reach for.
Yeah.
Davey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it has to be the revealed aspect that I just mentioned. There's so many crazy plays with it. It plays outside the deck in a way that others don't. It has a built-in, you can either use it to draw a power card, so it is a deck thinner, if nothing else, or you can swap upgrades out. You can swap upgrades from somebody who's dead. So there's so many cool, tricky plays. There's ways to use an upgrade more than once. I have done it to use seized weapon more than once in Grimwatch. So ping someone by ripping off an arm, swap their upgrade, rip off another arm.
Love it.
And if you really want to get crazy, then you can scrabble in the dirt and pick up revealed aspect again and do it yet a third time. So rip off their third arm. I don't know. Yep. Rip off a leg. And so it just unlocks all the, and I could go on at great length for all these, but in championship, like, it may not be the most powerful. Like you probably like just a push one is more powerful, but like for the ceiling for the amazing moment, like that's hard to beat.
Agree. All right, Phil, you're up.
Yeah. So I guess I'll take maybe 2 answers here, because since if you're taking anything out of this deck, we already said that you're probably ending up having to lean pretty heavily into this deck. And so like in championship, that's not always why you're looking at decks. It's like, if this doesn't have a plot card, then maybe I want to just grab something out of here just because, and just play it. And one card that I think you could actually slot into a number of different decks is totally overpowered. This is an end phase. You hold 2 or more objectives, and more than half the fighters in 1 or more enemy warbands are out of action and or have wound counters. That second condition there, I think, makes this much more playable, in that there are a lot of pings in the game right now. And so I think there will be times where you could even use this and set it up where you're like, I'll just put 1 wound on this guy just so I can score this 2 glory end phase, as a nice little flex card that you could throw in.
Love it. If you didn't take it, I was going to take it.
Yeah, but if you're just in masks completely, then I think Hooded Rush is an amazing card, because this is sidestep unless you have a mask, and then it's push 2, and then it's just a straight upgrade over sidestep. So we don't see that often anymore, I don't feel like.
Agree. And even in championship, I think there's a reason to potentially dip into some of these masks. And if you're doing that, then definitely give Hooded Rush a look. For my pick, I will pivot over to a very niche one then. I'll pivot over to Displacing Figurine. So this is, as an action, pick an objective in an empty hex. Place this fighter on the objective you picked. Give this fighter 1 charge token, then break this card. So what I think about, or is cool about this in the context of championship, is particularly that charge token. So like if you're playing hold, in your territory, and you have a fighter that can't close the gap, is kind of like further back in your field, and you're dwindled down to enough fighters where you want that charge state, or even if you're not, but particularly in that case, you can teleport somebody behind the enemy, right? If they've invaded you, then at any point in time, displacing figurine can be an action to just teleport somebody maybe completely out of reach for them. Now you're holding an objective, and it has the potential to also charge out your warband. Kind of a neat little piece, but very niche, especially for the cost of an action. All
Agreed.
right. Well, let's jump into the next deck then, and I get to helm this one, so it's definitely going to be Rime-Locked Relics.
Yeah.
Really shock.
Hold up. One thing, real quick. On our way out of Malevolent Masks, I just want to say warbands. And I think I can just say the ones that we've already covered. We've covered the Lady Hero's Mournflight, the Exiled Dead, and Grimwatch. We're all kind of mentioned there for Malevolent Masks. And if you've got Resurrection, definitely give Malevolent Masks a look, or if you've got Seed Glory and can afford the upgrades. But didn't want to fully jump out of that category without hitting that, so apologies there. On to Rime-Locked Relics. So the summary here, thematic and mechanical, much like Masks, is really tied together. And I love that about a lot of this modern design, is that the theme and the mechanics really feel like one. So what we have here is we have the stars of this deck are the Rime-Locked Relics themselves. This does have a plot card, and that plot card talks about when you have a Rime-Locked card come into play, or a card become Rime-Locked, how it thaws. And it's going to take 3 turns. Can be your turns or your opponent's. Add those up. But after 3 activations in total, as long as you're not cheating thaw counters out faster, you'll put a thaw counter on, and once it hits 3, it will flip over. And so you have to wait for these relics. And so mechanically, we have these relics that we've pulled out of the ice, and we can't use quite yet. But once we can use them, they're going to be powerful. And that is, I think, well realized in these upgrades. I think all of these upgrades, for the most part, have a place where they can absolutely rock. And then outside of kind of what your upgrades are doing for you, which is definitely the main theme of the deck, mechanically, it's also a flex deck. So you're going to be holding, and you're also going to be looking for a little bit of kill. So we've got a really good flex package here, and you're going to be looking to thaw out these powerful upgrades and utilize them towards your game plan. So why you'd reach for it in Nemesis? So for me, if you have a warband that is already somebody who's going to enjoy that mix of holding and attacking, I think that's like a good reason to dip into this deck. Or if you can do support shenanigans with a card that exists in this deck called Layfrost Conduit, it's the best upgrade in here. We actually recently covered Rime-Locked Relics when we were talking about the end of like the content storm, and after having a bit of time with it, so Rime-Locked Relics actually saw quite a bit of time in that episode, and Layfrost Conduit was something I mentioned there as well, because whether you're using it when you're standing on an objective, which is one of the functions it has, if you're on an objective, that fighter is considered to be supporting all other friendly fighters. But it also says that when this fighter is an attacker, the target has -1 defense dice. So this upgrade just rocks. But if you can put it on somebody who naturally provides 2 supports, all of a sudden you have a target that the enemy needs to take down and get off of that objective token. Because that's on offense and defense, and it's nuts. So how do you two feel about Rhymelock Relic? It's like, when are you reaching for it?
Well, I love that it's in the game in general. I love that, so it's almost surprising that this was of the 4 decks that were in the Deathgorge season, that both this and Masks were in the same conversation, because they're both ones that on paper ostensibly like revolve strongly around of some particular upgrades that they bring. But I think Rhymelocked has the most that it can do without. Like, it's Rhymelock, the upgrades themselves are actually more independently functional than the Masks are. And also it has stuff that scores without relying on them as much. But even more so, the fact that there are multiple things that say multiple objectives that care about holding objectives, that has just kind of reintroduced some gameplay feel that I haven't had in quite a while, where I'm really thinking hard about, do I want to stand on this objective? Do I want to put this where it's harder for the opponent to grab? Like, there's been some really heady gameplay that operates around some of the things that this brings, and I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the few decks where the game really starts when you hear that they have this plot card, and you're on that board's objectives decision, and you're placing out those objectives. Like, some decks that can be inconsequential, but when you hear this, or you're running this, like, all of a sudden that stage matters so much more.
Right.
Yeah. I think this is one of the better decks for supporting hold that we've seen, just period, in the Nemesis era. The other ones being Fearsome Fortress and Paths of Prophecy. And so I just appreciate that we have more hold support. It feels like there's been so little of it over the last couple of years. That's really great to see. And I think you're totally right that, like, this is one of those ones that it changes how you play your matchups, because your opponent's going to need to invade. There's a number of different things with holding in enemy territory and holding in, like, all the objectives in one territory. And so there's a lot more, I guess, benefit to kind of trying to counterplay this deck. And then it's nice that it does offer some other tools, so that if, like, you don't want to be, like, all in on the hold game plan, that you can do that. Sometimes that is the potential pitfall of, like, a hold deck, is that it's like, cool, I've got all this stuff for holding, and then I don't have anything else I can do. So if I get pushed off for whatever reason, everything kind of falls apart.
I mean, I think you said one of the phrases that we've frequently championed on this, like counterplay.
Yeah.
I think there's powerful things in this deck, and they are not without counterplay, and that's what I love about it. I love that if you pull it off well, you get these big payoffs, and that your opponent, through good gameplay, can make that harder for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sign of a really well-designed deck.
Yeah, I like the tension that brings on your side, and, like, the interest that it brings to that whole game, knowing that you have to, like, keep that counterplay in mind, like, the whole time, is really fun. I hadn't really thought about that, so I'm really glad that came up here, because it puts into words something that I've been feeling as I've been playing this deck, and it hadn't quite registered mentally for me. But yeah, more of this type of build, please.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So I think we'll kind of jump straight into cards that you pick out of here for championship, and then maybe discuss a little bit more of, reasons that it works well in Nemesis, as we're kind of grabbing our war bands, actually. So In Champs, what card, or rather, since we have a plot card here, why would you grab this deck over another deck with a plot card?
I mean, I think it overwhelmingly has to be I care about objectives, and I want extra payoff for doing that. It has, if you are willing to take some of the upgrades, it has obviously if you're playing Championship Supremacy, Hold 3 is already available to you, but Wintry Conquest is Hold 3, have a Rhyme Locked upgrade. You can double down on that, and there's been times in the past where certain warbands have been able to do that, kind of take a double supremacy, and it leads to, if you can pull it off, it leads to just spectacular end phase scores. So I think you're reaching for this through the plot lock if you want to have access to some of those big scores.
Yeah. I think when you have a hold warband in front of you in Championship, you're considering first and foremost Fearsome Fortress or this, and Fearsome Fortress is soon out of the picture here in October when the new season rolls in, and then occasionally Void Curse Thralls I find enters that picture just because your Void Curse fighters can't be driven off of objectives, and you can have some positional scoring as well in that deck, like with Threatening Presence. So weirdly, that one kind of enters the hold conversation as well. But Rhymelock Relics is part of that. Anytime you sit down to build hold and Championship, and then you get to like kind of grab pieces out of Pass the Prophecy, and we'll hit that a bit later.
Yeah, I think I totally agree that like if you're hard in on the hold game plan, you're strongly looking at this. I think depending on what your power deck provides innately, I think will sort of be the tipping point. Similar to Masks, where it's like when we were talking about the Nemesis pairings, it's like, can I, or I guess, do I want more of what's in this deck's power deck, or do I want more of what's in my faction power deck? And if you're like, I have some power stuff that I just cannot leave at home in my faction deck, that might make it harder to pick this one up, because you do need, a certain number of these Rhyme Lock cards, because I think it would be hard to justify the plot lock if you're not going to be going fairly deep into this deck's objectives, and they do require those relics. But I do think the payoff is pretty strong. I think actually in Championship probably more so, because you have a better gambit pool than what this provides you. I think it's fair to say that there's a number of different gambits in this deck for Nemesis where you probably don't really want them.
Yeah. I strong agree.
and so then when you are doing this in Nemesis, it can be this sort of awkward situation where you're like, oh, what am I putting in here for my gambits? But in Champs, that is like not a problem at all, because
right,
you've got
exactly.
so many good choices. Like even just having Sidestep to add to this deck makes this deck look a ton better. So
goodbye, Fractured Steps.
Yeah, get out of here. So yeah, totally agree. I guess the other way that you could actually look at this is that if you're like, I'm actually a pretty aggressive deck, but I don't mind holding a little bit, that could actually be a good reason to take this one as well.
Yeah, agree. And I think in Nemesis or Champs, kind of one of the cards you're always taking is Glacial Advance, which is allowing you. It's just a card I couldn't resist mentioning because it gives you push 2, and when you're deck building and you have access to pushing 2 different fighters. Sorry, not a push of 2, but choose up to 2 fighters, push each one. If you know that that's in your deck, then when you're putting down objectives at the beginning of the game, you're making sure that 2 of your objectives are in your territory near starting hexes, so that if you luck into this card, you're able to immediately push onto 2 scoring positions. And in this case, it also allows you the choice of a move or a charge token, which can be really big. Like you are required to grab one of them, so the flexibility is appreciated, but it adds intrigue to this card as the round goes on too, and you lose fighters, and then you can just all of a sudden become charged out. in a surprise where one or two of your fighters are able to just quickly get onto objectives and charge out your warband.
Yeah. And I think there's also factions that would really love seeing this, because it's like, I already have a push multiple fighters gambit in faction, which is better than this one, but now I can double down and I can have multiple of that effect.
Absolutely.
Which is amazing.
I mentioned early on about running this with Dread Pageant, this pairing, and just having that in hand meant that I could it brought me back to those days. Like, I'm going to get on everything that I want to get on, and then I have this in my back pocket.
Yeah.
If I get shoved off, then I'm just going to pick up that one more. Like, it's really good.
Yeah.
Really
And I don't know why I didn't think about this until right now, but thinking about Dread Pageant, it's like having these hold things is great. It's even better if you have fighters with ranged attacks. If you can be range 2+ and you can stand on the objective and still attack people, and not and like the positioning isn't as big of a problem, because sometimes, when you're like, oh, I have to stand on this objective and now I can't charge somebody. Well, if you have range 2 or 3, you probably can still charge, and that just adds efficiency to your game plan. I think we'd probably be remiss if we also didn't mention the objective that I think is maybe one of the strongest pulls into this deck besides the Supremacy duplicate, and it's Icebound Defenders. And I feel like
it's so good.
Every single hold warband would love to have this card available. It is, for folks who don't know, this is a duel. It is an end phase for 2. Your warband holds 2 or more objectives, and you hold each objective in 1 or more territories. Going back to the point about how you have to think about setup when you see this plot card, either for yourself or your opponent, if you want to block them from putting one in the midline of the board, because if there's just the one in the no one's territory, that satisfies the secondary condition of hold each in a territory. And
just to expand on that, if you are looking at the board, I'm like, I cannot stop there being just one in there.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe you need to be the one to put it, so you know exactly where they want to be, right? Like, sure, like, I can't stop there being just one in no man's, but I'm going to put it right here where you're just going to get hammered. Anyone who goes on is going to get just blasted by whoever, or, like maybe you're Molag and you say like, okay, you can have it. It's right in Malag's club range. Have fun with that.
That sounds fun, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. If I set up boards and I square them up and I've got the 2 objectives against this warband, I'm going to see if I can't tempt them into putting that one in the middle there. But then I'm going to try to get a second one in the middle there. And then I'm going to try to also get like an additional one in there, like just over the line into their territory. Like,
I see.
Kind of control the fight, I suppose.
2 in their territory, 2 in no one's.
Yeah. Make this harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. So let's talk about warband pairings with this deck and zip off to our next universal deck to break down here. So I'm going to kick off just because listeners already know that I love Skace Wild Hunt, and I love this pairing in particular for them. It's just when you look at the objectives, gambits, and upgrades, it's just such and like their game plan, it's a perfect marriage. Like it's as if there were 2 halves made for each other. The game plan there is absolutely this like really punchy flex build, where you're able to take ranged shots from your landing places with like Althane and Scathe, and it's just really, really cool. Like, then there's still like enough wiggle room where you kind of get to explore your choices too. So love that. Any other warbands that you guys would like to toss in here?
I've been thinking about if Crimson Court would make sense with this deck, but I haven't actually like seen it or built it out yet. The other one though that I think is really good right now is Sepulchral Guard. This kind of just meshes really well with everything they're already trying to do. And yeah, it's just like, let's take peanut butter and chocolate and just make a beautiful pairing. I have seen a deck played a number of times, and I know it's done very well at events too. I think it's quite strong. Sepulchral Guard are having a bit of a moment.
Yeah, I believe their most recent win was the Atlanta U.S. Open with this pairing.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think along those lines, anything, you know, I've tried this with, you know, any deck that's caring about objectives is going to think about this. So I've already talked about Dread Pageant a couple times because I've got some great in-faction end phases for holding things. There is Thorns are great. I think Spike Claw can do some work with this because they don't mind getting dirty in enemy territory with the new revamp thing. I've just been surprised by how many decks actually can reach for this and make some progress with it. I've actually tried out. It's not as good as other pairings with this deck, other warbands with this deck, but even Farstriders, I've built a working deck with this just because they have such great in-faction gambits that they don't care that this doesn't bring a lot of gambit help. They're like, that's fine. I'll take 9 of my faction gambits. Then I will make some of this other stuff work.
Right.
And they have their upgrade space. And so it's kind of backing into the deck where you're like, well, I've got the room for upgrades and I sure don't need any of your gambits because my gambits are hot fire and I'm going to just make it work with objectives. And this has been one of the most surprising decks, how wide ranging it appears to be.
Yeah.
I think maybe it was the inaugural Bacon Bits, and I've talked about this some, but Mark over at Path to Glory did a whole article about like, hey, if you're taking a pairing with masks, then you should be taking instead a pairing with Rime Black Relics. I don't know that I 100% agree with all the conclusions drawn, and he says it in the article, you know, like, hey, I know I'm making like a dramatic point here. If you disagree, that's okay. But it was a really interesting way to think about it. So,
very.
Yeah.
I think one last warband, because I'm sure if George is listening, he's probably screaming right now that we haven't mentioned it yet, but with Cunnin Crew. Right. They do some really fun stuff with their movement shenanigans with hold and multiple range 2 attacks. So
yes, indeed. I was gonna bring it up as the honorable mention. I have the deck built and got to play it this Thursday.
Yeah, a knee biter hanging out with Layfrost Conduit saying everybody's got double supports for everything.
Yep. Well, and there's a fun board right now too with the 3 starting hexes in a triangle around them. And so that can be 3 launch, or like, you know, you can launch 3 fighters all at once, you know, if one of those are
sure.
Your leader. Yep.
Lovely. Fun stuff.
Indeed. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got 2 more decks yet to tackle. So Phil, we're tossing the ball back to you. Which would you like to grab?
We were just talking about hold. Let's keep it rolling. We'll go back to Paths of Prophecy. So our older deck, not actually in this season. I would argue this is the only Nemesis deck that is a pure hold. It is entirely focused around objectives and in some ways is kept in check and potentially not used as much as you might expect because almost everything cares about the objective numbers, which means there's a very strong random element to the deck, which isn't always what you want because you already have a lot kind of working against you if you're a pure hold warband. But beyond that, the deck does have a number of powerful cards in its power deck, which can be pretty fun. And it does have a couple of fairly passive scores. So if you are the kind of warband that likes to do some tricky stuff in the power step and score for standing around on objectives and not really engaging as much, this might be the deck for you. And at least in my opinion, Starblood can take advantage of this one quite well.
It's so I really enjoyed the episode by Underworld's Underground, their tier list episode. If you haven't listened to it, do yourself a favor.
So great.
It's one of my favorite pieces of Underworld's content out there, period. And they really dive into the theme of each Universal Rivals deck out to date. And they kind of talk about how, like, initially the Paths of Prophecy doesn't really kind of feel like the theme is there because it's all about seeing prophetically these paths, and often it's depicted as like stars in the sky and celestial. But Cabañas makes an argument. He's like, that's what all the numbers are about. Is you have to like see the numbers to see the prophecy. So when you're looking at this deck and you're trying to find the theme, I think that's the strongest argument for it, because most of the objectives are asking you to be on specific numbers. So this also often gets referred to as the mathematician's deck.
Sure. Yeah. Can you count to 7?
And having to hang out on exact values too most of the time is really tricky, because you have one objective asking you to be on an exact value at this moment and another asking you to be on a different moment. But then when we're looking at end phase, it's like, shoot, which one do I go for? So I find that this deck pulls against itself sometimes, but I would agree with you that it's definitely the purest hold deck at this point in time.
Yeah, for sure. So last time we were sort of, rather than diving into cards and pairings and stuff right away, we said, oh, let's do champs and then we'll talk pairings and Nemesis cards and reasons later. So do you want to do it the same way here?
Yeah, let's crack into it that way. When this deck came out on our blog, it was an interesting, because at the end of our blog, we'll try to, for Universal Rivals decks, have like a closing statement regarding how it kind of interacts with Nemesis, and one on how it interacts with Championship. And they were two completely different blurbs.
Yes.
The Championship one, I remember writing, this is an escalation event. Like if you're playing Championship, you need to buy this deck.
Yeah, there's too many power cards that you wouldn't want to be without, for sure.
Yeah, so what would be one of those choices?
Well, I mean, it's not maybe surprising, but I think one of the most popular ones for Championship is, or if it's not, should be Slinking in there.
Yeah.
So again, we have the sidestep with added bonus, and this one doesn't require you have some upgrade applied first. You just can push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes if they end on an objective. That's so right, good.
Folks. You're listening to What the Hex.
If you were in doubt.
Yeah, but a basically free push 2 gambit. Like if you can't find a good reason to land on an objective that's 2 hexes away, I'm not sure what you're doing. Because even if you don't care about holding, you can still push the fighter to that spot and then be in a probably good position to be making attacks or get away from an opposing fighter. If there's stuff that's like, hey, score this so long as you have this, a fighter in this territory. Well, this is a way to scoot across the line at the last second. There's just so much flexibility with this card. And I honestly remember reading it when the deck came out and thinking like, what are they doing? This card's like too good. But it makes sense in the Nemesis landscape where you're getting this card because you're having to do so many hard things in the objective deck.
Mm-hmm.
So a pick that I would also venture is extremely good is Guided by Fate. +1 dice to this fighter's attack happens if this fighter and or the target is on a feature token. So whether you're coming from a feature token or coming at a feature token, +1 dice, no range limit.
So good.
Oof. Yeah. There's so many key portions of that, because like it's a fairly simple card, but +1 dice is relatively rare at this point. Range restricted, or range unrestricted, I should say. And then the fact that it's feature token on or target on, like feature, not objective. So that really opens things up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big time. Well, you guys mentioned a gambit and an upgrade, so I'll have to go with an objective, and that would be Devoted Offerings in the Championship environment. This is a surge for 1 if you play your third or subsequent ploy in the same action phase, or you draw your third or subsequent power card in the same action phase. That is pretty much impossible for your opponent to do anything about, which really increases its attractiveness when you are deck building.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that slots in kind of no matter what deck you're building, just about, but especially if you think you might be doing some drawing, or, in the championship environment where you can have dual wits or these extra card draw cards that really make this easier to fire off.
Yeah. We haven't, and like, this is another one where it was kind of like, really? We're going to print this? Because like, we haven't seen a card like this since what, Dire Chasm Beastgrave era, where like there was some in-faction stuff where it was just like, oh, you played Ploys? Cool. Here's some glory. And it's like,
yeah. Hrothgorn.
Well, and his is even worse, but
Yeah.
we don't need to,
Yeah.
we don't need to get that back out of the
dig that back up from the salt mines where I buried it.
Yeah. But like this card, if you are just building out your deck to your game plan, right, and you get to the end and you're like, man, it'd be nice if I just had like one more reliable surge that I could just slot in here that I didn't have to worry about like meeting other conditions for, really, other than to just sort of play the game. Well, this is one that's going to let you do it. There won't always be cases where you have 3 ploys that you can play, but man, there are certainly a lot. And it's just like you said, there's no way to counter this. Like if your opponent has it, they have it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when Championship had Sudden Revelation available to it, that everybody would run it, and it generally was inevitable. And this one can get jammed up, but it was this reliable Seed Glory. And
Sudden Revelation being...
Sudden Revelation was, if I'm remembering the right card here, that you delved 2 feature tokens.
Up 2 feature,
during a power phase. And so it was a card that everybody had access to. And I remember there was conversations about whether or not it was good or bad for the game. And I loved it because I thought it was really cool that you could draw into this ramp no matter what warband you were, and that it had everybody caring about feature tokens. So I think that one in particular has more interest than this one does, but it's the parallel here is that it's a card that anybody can bring, and it can be that early reliable ramp for them potentially, and get the ball rolling. So with Passive Prophecy, there's even more in here that we could pick out in regards to champs. When we're looking at Nemesis, and I think you were right here, Phil, to kind of shift the conversation to Nemesis plus warbands, because when you're talking about why you'd reach for it, you can also talk about who. Whereas within Championship, even if this was plot locked, that would change the conversation. But in Championship, really anybody can dive into this, right? So it's not about what warband is this deck right for in Championship. It's more who it's right for in Nemesis. So what warbands would reach for this, and why?
Well, personally, I have played it a lot with Starblood Stalkers, and I think they're sort of a good example of what you would be looking for when you are wanting to run this deck in Nemesis. You have a deck that really cares about holding objectives. You have a faction that really cares about holding objectives. And you have a faction deck that already has tools for really helping you get to where you need to be when you need to be there. And because of the nature of some of these cards, where it's like, hey, you held a value of exactly 7, or you have exactly objective 3 held, like that means your mobility is sort of a must. Like you really are going to need to be able to be wherever you need to be at a moment's notice. And I think that actually does mean that this is a pretty hard deck to find Nemesis pairings for. Off the top of my head, the only ones that I'm really thinking about besides Stalkers are there's Thorns, because they have multiple teleports and they have the push tech in their faction built in. And then I know it's been played a few times with Gore Chosen, although I don't know a lot about that pairing.
Oh, he hit all 3 of them. I have nothing more to add to the conversation.
So the Gore Chosen one is that is a faction that is a warband that is screaming out for easy surges, which this provides.
Oh, sure. So. Yep. No, that makes sense. And then some neat power cards so they can have like +1 dice on a Gore Hulk.
Yeah.
And I love the Thorns plus Passive Prophecy pairing. I mentioned before, it's one I got to build on What the Decks, and it's been the most interesting to explore from like the potential that exists there. Like, it's a very technical deck, but there's so many ways to push and move your fighters around that you can try to play to finding those exact values as needed.
Absolutely.
I've got. Hold on. I just got to put my lab coat on real quick. All right. Okay. Now I'm ready to mad scientist this. I have not gotten the chance to try yet. Fungal Prophecy, which is.
Tell me this is Loon Court.
No, this is Mollog Paths of Prophecy.
Oh, wow.
Is not what we were expecting.
No. Well, and the idea here was like, there's just a few cards that just seem incredibly powerful if you can give them to the troll. One of them being Guided by Fate. If that troll's got Fair Fortune, which is hand out a free upgrade, like an upgrade on a big platform like that is a really big deal. Slinking in there a push or push 2 on that big guy is a big deal. There's a heal with Sucker and Certainty. And so I don't think it's great, but that was my kind of lateral thinking of like, what if there was like a way to only just kind of scrape out the pieces of this in a Nemesis format that don't actually care that much about objectives. And there's very little in this deck. But there might be enough that you could do something with it. So, I got to try it, but
yeah, I'm looking forward to heing reports on this.
Right.
Yeah. That's cool.
Before we depart from
Passive Prophecy, skeptically.
No, it's just got wheels turning for other things you could do with this. Yeah. I hadn't thought about.
We can't leave Passive Prophecy without mentioning that Cabañas also brought this deck with Loon Court too, and I almost forgot until I heard that fungal reminder. Brought this to LVO and performed quite well with it. He built it literally like the night before, and at the very least, he can say that he what's the card that heals all of them?
I don't think
it's a Loon Court one.
Yeah, it's a Loon Court card. Okay. Yeah. He got to full heal against a avalanche that happened to him.
Attaboy.
Yep. It was against Jazz, and Jazz took the risk of wounding her own to wound a field of himself, and then full healed it away. And she was like, rude. But
nice.
Enough said there. Let's tackle our last deck, and that is going to be Breakneck Slaughter. We do have a plot card here, and our helmsman will be Davey.
So Breakneck Slaughter. This is a really interesting deck. I will give you the quick overview here, though. It is a deck that is built around uncontrolled speed, uncontrolled aggression, I would say. There's a plot card that is the momentum and impetus mechanics, which basically, as you get momentum counters, then you have to trigger the impetus rule, which is where people will go flying off in different directions. The deck has a whole bunch of stuff that is like handing those off or mitigating them in some effect, or scoring because they were used in some way, or somehow harnessing them. But it also has some stuff that's just, here's some tools, some aggressive tools. Here's some things that make attacking more effective. And I feel like it's a deck on first pass. I wasn't sure what to think of it. And I've been another one in the same way as, no, and that's not even true. I've been surprised at some of the decks that are able to leverage this. It's had much more mileage than I would have thought at first glance. But the real question you have when you're looking at this is like, how hard do I lean in this deck? Do I just skim off the top for like the really great stuff that's in there, or do I have to like go deeper into the whole, like I talked about, the momentum and impetus mechanics? Yeah,
and one thing that I think that's interesting that's happened with the release of this deck, and I think this is kind of an inevitable piece of playing aggro, is if two aggro decks exist, and they don't stand apart in like uniqueness enough, then you're going to see one of them kind of win out. So like Tooth and Claw is currently, in our pool. And I think it's, our most direct comparison to Breakneck Slaughter in like an aggro offering. And you see Tooth and Claw so much less now that Breakneck Slaughter is out. And I think that's because when you're looking at Breakneck Slaughter, if you can shake off some of the negatives in this deck and embrace the end phases, then it has a lot of reliable scoring to offer you. I mean, it elevates stat lines. Like the idea of, balancing an attack profile against the movement of a fighter. And then this is a deck that can say, no, that fighter can reach you. All of a sudden, that's really scary. But not only can it reach you, we can elevate the amount of dice they're throwing at you. We can elevate the amount of damage they're throwing at you, all while offering them movement speed. So it's hyper aggressive.
I think that could be the tagline for this deck. Breakneck Slaughter, hyper aggressive. When I've been looking at this one as well, and I don't know that this adds a ton to the conversation, but it's just like, how much does the warband that I'm picking care about positioning? If it's basically not at all, beyond like I need to be next to opponent so that I can hit them with sharp stick, then I'm very happy to take this deck, because then the downside really isn't a downside anymore, right? Because you're just like, well, once I get to you and have charged, I don't really care where my fighter is, because like they already did what they needed to do. They're like cruise missile style. I shot them off and they did their thing, and now where they sit afterwards is somewhat irrelevant. I don't know that we have a lot of warbands that work that way today in the game. I think most aggro warbands are a little more nuanced than that, but I've certainly built a deck for Reavers with this. I haven't played it yet, but I've certainly built it.
Yeah, and speaking of Reavers or warbands in particular, let's combine that Nemesis and Warband conversation once again here, and let's lead with it, especially since we have this plot card. So, what warbands are you pairing with this deck, and why are you reaching for this deck? And I'll lead off with one here. Headsman's Curse is one that I have experience running this deck with. Normally, aggro isn't really my play style, so Breakneck Slaughter and Tooth and Claw, for that matter, are decks that commonly just sit in my collection and don't see play from me. It's just not the play style I necessarily prefer. But with the What the Decks project, I play things that we're building for the show. And so I got to play that here. And what I thought was interesting about it, and why you'd reach for it when you're playing something like Headsman's Curse, is they have such a good power deck that I didn't have to worry about bringing any of the negatives, right? Like I could pretty much just dip into the idea of momentum as much as I felt comfortable with, without really having to like full tilt lean into it. And I thought it was a pretty scary deck once it was all said and done.
Yeah. I guess I can grab another one here. It's one I've only played one time so far, but Skinnerkin are a warband that very much cares about being able to get to your opponent and attack. And they're already pretty fast, but this just makes that much more reliable. You're even faster. You're making a high volume number of attacks. So it has a lot of what they want. Skinnerkin do care a decent amount about positioning, and so in that way I am still a little hesitant to use this deck with them, but anything that's providing you extra speed, extra dice, extra damage in a warband that wants to be charging most of the time, you're pretty happy with. And then the objectives in this deck for aggro are truly great. I think we'd be if you need just one thing to be able to make this deck work for an aggro warband, is Eager for the Fight is this end phase that they have that just says, score this in an end phase for 2 if each of your surviving friendly fighters has 1 or more charge tokens, or they're within 2 hexes of 1 or more enemy fighters. That's about as flexible as it comes for a 2 glory end phase, and it's pretty hard to stop unless you've been tabled.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so reliable because the enemy fighters part of that equation is really controllable by you, right? Like as soon as an enemy has a charge token on them, and that they're a pylon for like helping you position against this, even if you can't get charges. And so, especially if you've got 4 fighters, you're very likely scoring this round 1. And to add to like the strong end phases that this deck offers, Rapid Strike is crazy for 2 points. Score this in an end phase if the number of enemy fighters out of action is equal to or greater than the round number. So round 1, equal to or greater than, right? So just 1 fighter in round 1. If this was something you managed to luck into or mulligan into, you can just kill one of their fighters and grab 2 glory. And I like that, it's 2 in round 2, 3 in round 3. But it's at its hardest in round 3. The rest of the game, it's easy breezy.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that this deck is a bit we'll use the word overtuned, but I'm cautious to use the word overtuned because I don't want to like say that this is broken per se, but I think it's so strong in the sense that it not only elevates your ability to push an aggro game plan into an enemy warband, but it also rewards reliably and strongly with the objective package. And I kind of feel like both of those factors are elevated together. And I think from a balance standpoint, you'd actually want to see one of those fall behind the other, right? If we're like elevating your ability to get to your opponent and elevate your stats, so you're throwing more dice, you're dealing more damage, you're going to have more bounty. So maybe we pull down the lever that is how reliable your scoring is or how rewarding your scoring is. But both levers are kind of at full throttle here.
Sure. I mean, I think where you see that some of the other pairings that I think end up happening, if you are a champion of some earlier warbands, Phil already mentioned Reavers. I think Magors, this is one of their pairings that they like. Magors in particular is a warband with just shockingly bad objectives. And to the extent that they're so bad that you have to go pretty deep in this deck's objectives. And the deeper you go in this deck's objectives, the more of the momentum impetus mechanic you have to rely on, and the more bite it takes out of their gambits and upgrades. So I think you see some of that. And then that where all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I got a few reliable things, but I have to take some of these other things that are more combo oriented. There is, we haven't spent much time on it, but there is, maybe a third of this deck, which is reliant on, hey, did you have this many impetus things happen? Did you have this many, get this and this and this happen together? Then you can trigger this card. And so the warbands that really get to kick it in the stratosphere are the ones that don't have to lean on that, like Reavers or Magors. And there I'm thinking of like Hexbane or Domatan or Rippas, who can all do pretty cool things with this. I think at the time of this recording, I think Domatan Breakneck Slaughter might be like the premier pairing in the game. And it's because they can do this aggro game plan. They have the range to get the attacks off. They don't have to dip super hard into this deck, but they benefit from some of the things that we haven't even talked about, which is some of the defensive tricks that this deck holds, which is Tumbler, Moving Mark, which puts you on 2 dodge or 2 block, with some caveats included there. Like that is a real thing that this deck adds to your repertoire if you're one of these warbands that needs a little help in that realm. And so if you can really benefit from added defense, if you don't have to dip super hard in the mechanic, then like some of those, then you've really got some good stuff going.
Yeah, I agree. I would just like to shout out Saxdom real quick there, because what will air on the Shade Glass Reflections YouTube is going to be the pink slip match of this century, the second pink slip match, Damatan's Breakneck Slaughter, run by Saxdom, and that's very much so his signature deck versus my signature Head Crackers, Fort Crackers, and that's coming soon. Yeah. I have word from Alex of Shadegrass Reflection that he's run into some technical difficulties, and the recording itself wasn't free of technical difficulties. However, they have been resolved, and he's making progress with a release date very soon, I imagine, by the time that you're listening to this.
I'm curious with we need to get into the record books, but I'm wondering if Thomas, he might be undefeated against. Has anyone from What the Heck's beat Thomas? That's what I'm trying to ask, because I ran into this particular pairing. I had been just on a tear with Masks Grimwatch and been like, I think this is amazing. Like I'm winning a lot of games. They're often very close. And then I played Breakneck Slaughter Damatans and got blown out about as bad as I had been almost ever. I was like, okay, well, that seems real good.
So that question is a trap, and I will not fall for it, Davey. I will not reveal to you the results of the pink slip match. All right. When I sat down to it, Thomas and I realized we'd actually never played a game. The two of us, never in person, never over Vassal. So this was our first chance to actually play a game against each other.
I haven't gotten to play him yet either, so he cannot say that has complete domination over the entirety of What the Hex, because he hasn't even played all of us yet.
Keep running, Phil.
I've actually been trying to set up a game with him, but he's pretty busy with family stuff.
Yeah, sorry. Keep running, Thomas.
But no, I mean, it's a great pairing, and at least the first I ever heard of it was from him. I don't know if he can truly claim to be like the pioneer behind the deck, but he is certainly one of, if not the. It's a very, very strong pairing. It's very scary. Which again, shout out to Wellnut. He actually managed to overcome this pairing with his Exiled Dead Masks.
Ooh.
So.
Attaboy.
Yeah. In the finals league this Thursday.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But it was not without its scary moments for him. I'll say that.
For sure. Well, speaking of things said, is there anything more that we'd like to say on Breakneck Slaughter before we start wrapping up this episode?
That about covers it for me.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate the point, because we didn't really delineate it very well, but for champs, you really are, the same reasons for why you would take this in Nemesis is going to be why you're taking this one in for champs. And I don't think there's really a lot more that needs to be said. Like, I think if you're one of these aggro warbands and you want to play the aggro plan, like, this is probably going to be your pick for your plot card.
Yeah, I think in Championship, this is often going to be your primary choice, especially with aggro. But the fact that you can just dip into some of these extremely reliable 2 Glory End phases in Championship alone, like Eager for the Fight and Rapid Strike, aren't just barred off from, those seeking to play an aggro game plan. Like, those can be 2 Glory End phases that are easy to come by if you can just get the kills, at the same pace as the round. And get your positioning. A deck that's going to kind of spot you 4 glory and 2 cards is worth considering as a plot option, especially with everything else it can do for you. We didn't even mention Gale Force, just attack 3 times, right?
Oof, yeah.
As a surge, right? So I think this is one of the decks that is going to be like a general consideration in champs, but very much so the pick when you're going aggro.
Totally.
All right. Cool. Well, this has been a blast, you two. Thank you for joining me for this. And listeners, let us know what you thought of revisiting this format. We kind of made some improvements to it, and that we felt could help with the flow, make it a little more conversational, and really get you the details that we want to help you, build a picture of what these decks can do for you. We are looking forward to continuing this as a series. So look forward to hearing another episode like this one when Winter Maw concludes. Releases being kind, we'll try to actually fit this in, alongside the end of Winter Maw. Sometimes they like to release the ending, like universal pairing, alongside the new box, and that makes that a little hard.
Concurrently with the new box.
Yeah. And particularly, we had actually talked about this episode in advance of Deathgorge ending, but then we got hit by 10 releases in 2 weeks, and it was like, okay, this is going to have to be put on hold as an idea for a little bit.
Abyssos release avalanche.
Yeah,
exactly. So, thank you for joining us. So if you would like to get a hold of us, you can reach us at WTHcast on Twitter and whatthehexcast@gmail.com. If you want to shoot us an email, we're always checking that out. And you can check out all our content at themortalrealms.com, as well as a link to our Discord. We'd love to have you there. So coming up next, we're feeling that out. So if there's anything that you've been missing on the What the Hex podcast that you would like us to revisit, maybe you really loved that last audio bat rep that we did. That was our last episode, and you need more of them in your life. Let us know. Otherwise, stay tuned, and we'll make sure to deliver some good content your way. And to wrap this show up, I get to lead a Flava text quiz. Are you two ready?
Born ready.
Oh, as ready as I'll ever be.
So with this Flava text, you get a choice. Would you like a safety tip or a dancing tip?
It's got to be a dancing tip.
I mean, I don't even know what that means, but let me have it.
All right, here we go. If there's nothing to crump, go find something. And this is attributed to Gerzak Iron Skull.
This is Breakneck Slaughter. It is Everybody Has a Move, and I'm trying to remember what that one was.
Is it what's it? It's not too slow, right?
It's not too slow.
Yeah.
But I will say the cold hot meter is on fire.
Let's see. It's like Need for Speed.
It is exactly
okay. All right.
Need for Speed.
Yeah, there it is.
Right. So I in preparation, because I knew it was going to the receiving end. I read through. I was like, I know he's going to pick it from one of these 5 decks, so I read through all the flavor text on these, and I had it related. And then I'm like, I know exactly the card art and all that, and I can't remember the name of the card, but got there eventually.
Good job studying, though. Cool. Good job. Well, Ace the quiz.
And we'll have to have me helm another show at some point in time so I can get you your safety tip. In the meantime, I've got some recommended listening for you, and that is Hella Good by No Doubt for some hella good deck building. That's no doubt in your future.
Beautiful.
All right. This has been What the Hex, and I've been Skyler.
I've been Davey.
And I've been Phil.
It's funny because everyone will dump out of bed for a call, and you can tell there's 2 or 3 people who just have strap marks across their face.
Yep.
And I was like, well, you're either using CPAP or you're cosplaying a Morton Joe. And I'm not sure.
Both are great answers.
Yeah, I'm happy with whichever way you go.
There we go. Starting out smooth.